you gave me so much of an intro point to a lot of what I want to learn about you and your story, because that is part of it. You're not judgmental anymore. You've gone through a lot of stuff before. Talk about that as you're a former scientist. Now you're doing the non-toxic dad stuff, but what led you into this? Because you don't have that judgmental bone because you've been through a lot. What was a lot?
Well, a lot of different things. I mean, we can go back to the sickness part, right?
Yeah.
Which is my first big learner of grace, because I was more of a classic evangelical Christian, I would say, while I was getting sick. And I remember even asking God at one point, I'm like, if you think you've got life figured out, then get ready for a big shift in your life to grow, right? And I remember it was a sermon, it was out church in the park, if you will, and I was like the poster child for Christianity. Like I had it all dialed in, and now I look back and I'm like, those guys were still out drinking and having a good time, but I didn't do any of that. Like, I'm like, woohoo, like I'm gonna nail this thing, right? I'm gonna be, super Christian, had a group of like 24. I had a small group that was bigger than some of the small churches in Missoula. It's not a very churchy town. It's a very loving, kind town, but it wasn't a very churchy town. People were outside enjoying nature and connecting with God that way, which I kind of understood, but still you need to be in church, right? Sort of thing. So I remember that happening, and something just like hit me in my gut, like, oh shit, I don't understand this. And as hard as I try to understand grace in people at the age of, I think at that point, I was probably 28 or something. I'm like, I don't get it. I hear what you're saying intellectually about grace and not judging people, but how, I didn't get it. And so this thing happened. I'm like, oh shit, something's going to happen. And it wasn't too long after that, probably 6 months, that debilitating symptoms started happening. I also had a whiplash accident that triggered a bunch of NMDA receptors in my neck and inflammation. And on top of that, I was doing a mercuric oxide cleanup at the time, which is it's red powder. It's probably the same mercury they used to put in tattoos because it's red, but they used to coat it on grains because, I could ask you, why would they put mercury on grains in the 80s? Maybe
I don't.
It was just an insecticide, fungicide. It was just why they put it in vaccines, right? You can triple and double stick and nothing grows, no bacteria, right? It just gets better harvest, right? Money at the end of the day. So I was cleaning up an old grain facility and mercury there, and I obviously did a ton of abandoned mines work before that, cleaning up abandoned mines, which is arsenic, lead, mercury again. So I was getting exposed to all this stuff, bad diet, whiplash, emotional changes going back to church. I noticed that this church wasn't all it cracked up to be. The pastor was dying of cancer, drinking Coke, and they tried to raise him from the dead. And it was like, man, that's not normal. Like, I get it. I see their heart in it. And I was like, but that's just weird. Like like, I get trying that. No judgment. But at the same time, it was just like, you weren't doing any of the things in nature that, I even knew back then when I was drinking Mountain Dew, like I even knew that wasn't a good thing, right? I'm just like, come on, guys, you're just going to pray about it? Like, what are the actions? What do you do in the natural? Like, even then I was like, as a scientist, I was published just in a few publications with the Montana Bureau of Mines and Geology for some research I was doing on abandoned mines and the binding of heavy metals and how it affects the environment, how it gets bound in the soil, how it's released into the environment, and a bunch of other modalities of cleaning up heavy metals in the environment. You can do with beads and all kinds of different things. But anyway, long story short, so I'm like, this doesn't make sense. Like, my mom went through cancer. She didn't do chemo. She got a lumpectomy, and she's been a survivor for 30 some plus years. If she had done chemo, she'd probably be dead, right? Because it would have just destroyed her immune system. But she was blessed enough to make that decision. It was the right decision. So going back to the logical side of it, I'm just like, a lot of this stuff started to unravel. My little, like you said, the psychology piece from our intro here is so important to healing, right? And people like lose their way when there's this group, this pastor that I looked up to. I'm like, there's this incongruency now. So it started to freak me out, and the church was getting a little too out there, right? So that security of that church, which was wonderful for me at the time, like it really gave me purpose. It really gave me a strong spirituality. I think I put in my show notes for you that I actually got my degree in divinity. Like I wanted to learn more. And I love that I learned that stuff. I had some really good professors that, had a really good approach, and some that didn't, but a really good approach to spirituality and in God and the Old Testament, the New Testament, Romans, and what we know on judgment, and just some really good, not like, just brilliant based on essentially the facts, right? The history, right? It was just wonderful. And when that unwound too, so I had that happen. It's like, wait a minute, my brain lost that security. It's almost like getting a divorce or some other trauma. So I had these emotional traumas, these physical traumas, and this toxic job of cleaning up hazardous waste. So I think all of that is what shut down. And I've worked with sick patients in the past, sick clients, if you will. And a lot of their problems always started right around a trauma too. I mean, you've been in your clinic, I'm sure you see the same thing. It's not just the poor eating. It's not just the exposure of the amalgam fillings or whatever it may be. There's these traumas that happen as well, which cause massive inflammation, hormonal spikes, and hormone dysregulation, and loss of belief and hope, and all of that. So I think, I've never shared this on a podcast before because I really haven't, because we started this just open conversation, and really good job by just listening and letting me go here. But it really was a really, really hard time. But that I've gone through a lot of more hard times. But so fast forwarding that forced me to sell it. I was so sick I couldn't function, weight gain, sound sensitivity. I couldn't go to church anymore. The small group ended because my phone ringing, doorbell, like sound sensitivity, like it just all started to go downhill quickly. Stop not sleeping at night. Like all of it, right? And I definitely had exposures. I remember hallucinating after a lead cleanup once. I mean, that's part of a acute exposure, right? And what we're getting today is chronic exposure, small doses that build up in our cells. They may say it's safe, but it builds up inside of your body. It's safe. It's fine. It's only a little bit. I love addressing that because the exposure limits, the permissible exposure limit that we're allowed to expose, even when you fill up your gasoline, the PELs matched at unless you have a vapor extraction unit on the gasoline, you're getting your maximum PEL, permissible exposure limit for that day. And we're getting it everywhere, right? Yeah. And it's building up in our cells. It's causing inflammation. So it was nuts. So moved back home into a moldy basement, which you deal with in your clinic as well. Got sicker, more pain, more chronic issues, right? So getting back to grace and understanding that I couldn't read my Bible, I couldn't go to church, chemically sensitive, no sleep, miserable, wearing donuts, trying pain meds, doctors telling me try Effexor. When I ask the question how it works, they don't even know. So I was like, you can't help me. People are saying that you're crazy. And especially when I got sick at the peak of my sickness, 2005, like the symptoms I were having weren't even acceptable. Like it was, you're nuts was the diagnosis. Something's wrong with you mentally, right? That was it. That's all they had. Fibromyalgia is a crazy man's disease, right? It's chronic inflammation. It's pain. It's your nerve endings are sensitive. Like this isn't crazy, man. This is a physiological inflammatory response in your body. And it wasn't about mitochondrial dysfunction and all the cascade of hormone problems in your hypothalamus, pituitary. None of that was cool, right? It wasn't even around. There wasn't even really the internet, right?
Yeah.
To search for this stuff. So luckily, I through my sister, my cousin, I found a doctor that had the same challenges, and that's what threw me into this. And when I started looking at the science and I start getting healing, I got very, very angry. I'm like, why isn't this being shared? Why are they still putting amalgam fillings in people's mouths? Why do they have all these toxins? So we got to educate doctors about this. So we started a company and just started doing all this and start educating. And eventually through those protocols, traveling all over, seeing the best, going to clinics like yours, we found answers for the mold, the heavy metals, and the chelation and natural chelation, and what works, what doesn't, what causes redistribution, and just went through that whole process. And the non-toxic dad part is I became so anal about my environment, if you will, right?
Mhm.
Especially in the beginning, because I was scared, and I was scared for good reason, that people start giving me stamps like, is that Warren approved? They literally bought me a stamp. I still have it in my drawer. And everyone always said, Warren, why don't you do something like that? I'm like, I don't want to get on social media. That's not me. I just, want to enjoy life and not have to be, looking in cameras. But the reason I did it is I tested it. My team, my friends, some mentors said, Warren, why don't you just try it? Like, and if it has an impact, if it feels right, just do it. But you're making all these excuses for failure instead of a test for success, if you will. So I gave myself all these excuses not to do something. Don't want to be on social media. Don't like my phone. Don't like EMF. Like, I can come up with thousands. But when you look at your life, you're like, where am I going to have the most impact? How can I reach people? Like, because I don't want people to go through the suffering that I did. I mean, yeah, it's created some great, strong psychology, but not everybody is wired like me. Like, I'm an all-American athlete. I take direction well. I can, I've been coached a lot and beat down a lot. So, and I don't think that was great, but it really set me up to be tenacious enough to push through all this and not give up. And like I said, I mean, I was at the point where I didn't want to live. Like, it was that bad. Like, I don't want to get into it, but it was like, God, heal my body, because I'm effing pissed. And if you don't start moving on my behalf, like, this is bullcrap, especially when you were super Christian before that, right? It's like, you did everything right, and God, you still punished me. It's like those just that weird psychology that came from that place. So it's really neat to be able to come out of the over spiritualization, but still have the strong connection to God and spirituality, and how that gives you superpowers and strength to push through things. But if it wasn't for that spirituality and that hope that it gave me, I probably would have done something stupid, right? But I knew in the back of my mind, like, God at this point hasn't failed me. And when you wait and when you're patient and you have the right attitude, it usually works out in the end. So, there you have it, and from there, life just continued. The learnings continue. The challenges continue. Never thought I was going to get married. Now I'm married and have 3 beautiful girls. I'm 48 and I have a 21-month-old. So on purpose, all 3 of my children, but very, very spaced, which is also part of decision-making, to be able to maintain the belief structure and detoxing my wife and having her heal and having her body heal. So I know that my wife is safe. I'm not just, you say have kids because we love kids, but it's making sure she's healthy and happy. So not that just that we have a healthy, happy babies, like we have all home births, all of that fun stuff. But my wife is protected, and that her heart and body were in the right spot to be able to handle. Again, that's a pretty serious undertaking, having a baby.
A huge one. And I want to get on that topic, but I found it really interesting as you were talking. You brought up 2 things that I've known to be true by just watching all the patients that come in here and seeing the results come out. Number one, the 2 patients that do the best are usually, number one is athletes, because they take such good direction. And you gotta be compliant. This isn't conventional medicine. Just take the pill and keep eating as you want and do whatever you want. Live in your toxic environment. We'll give you more pills as you start to break down more. Right. So athletes get it. They're like, okay, I got to cut out something I love. I'm cutting it out. That's it. Yep. No question about it. Number 2 are spiritually or religious faith-based people. If you have faith that things are going to turn around for you, even though it looks so bleak, I mean, the odds are there. I'm sure the research is there as well, will show that they have better outcomes in the same types of treatments and everything. So I found it really interesting that those 2 things, came up for you and you were able to break through.